Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. We are going to jump right in today. I have a very short sentence bio of our moderator, and we'll have a full hour to have some great discussions with her. So with us today is Maria Lovett, who is an associate clinical professor in the School of Education and Human Development here at FIU. She teaches courses such as social foundations and urban education. And thank you for being here, Professor Lovett.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, echoing. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to some of my students for coming. So yes, I've been here at FIU for 10.5 years, and I consider myself a community engaged researcher, teacher. So I spend a lot of time in schools and in neighborhoods. I worked for 4 years as the director of the Education Effect in Liberty City at Miami Northwestern High School in the feeder schools. But I really came also to Miami to work with what was called the Algebra Project, which was founded by Bob Moses, the civil rights leader. I worked with schools throughout Miami-Dade and now in Broward, and we've expanded to this alliance. And the goal is to really think about quality education as a constitutional right. And I'll talk more about that. So when I saw the article and the group of young people from Detroit suing for the right to a quality education, I thought it was a great and appropriate thing to talk about. So I'm going to start off, and hopefully this will be as interactive as possible even in this setting, asking you to read the preamble with me to the Constitution. I've done this in some of my classes, and this is inspired also by Dr. Moses, who sees that we could potentially use the preamble as an organizing tool. So I'm going to say the line, and then you all can repeat me. Oh, is that okay? Yeah. Okay. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, so now I would like you to turn to your neighbor or the person behind you and take a minute or two and think about what that means to you. So talk, or what you think. Yes, thank you.
Well, I think it's just establishing the basic rights and foundation for the society and for the taxpayers. You know, like we're all contributing to a society, so this is what society will contribute back to us.
Okay. Anybody else have a reaction?
The preamble to the Constitution is kind of like the mission statement, the preface to the Constitution, saying like, this is what we're about, this is what we believe in, and the Constitution goes into the details of how we're going to get to this.
Yeah. Anybody else have a reaction?
So me and Ann, we talked about how the preamble is like a historical document, but the "we the people" phrase in the beginning of the sentence didn't really encompass all the people of the United States. It had like a little asterisk next to it, and it had some exceptions like women, black people, and etc.
Because there was we the people, and there was also we the property.
Yeah.
So that's partly what I want to talk about and have us continue to think about as we follow the story of these young people in Detroit. Because I think it raises the question, or I hope we can discuss, who are the we the people today, right? And who are the we the people that are left out? And who do we want to we the people to advocate for? So I chose a pretty short article, which I think you have in front of you. And so I was hoping maybe I could get somebody to volunteer. Anybody like to read? That could read the article aloud. It's really short. Fabulous, thank you.
Access to literacy is not a constitutional right, judge in Detroit rules. Do students at poorly performing schools have a constitutional right to a better education? On Friday, a federal district court judge in Michigan decided that they did not, and he dismissed a class action lawsuit filed by students at a troubled schools in Detroit. The suit, filed in September 2016, argued that students at some of the city's most underperforming schools, serving mostly racial minorities, had been denied access to literacy because of underfunding, mismanagement, and discrimination. The complaint described schools that were overcrowded with students but lacking in teachers, courses without basic resources like books and pencils, and classrooms that were bitingly cold in the winter, stiflingly hot in the summer, and infested with rats and insects. Conditions like those, the lawsuit said, contributed to dismal test scores that left students woefully unprepared for life after high school. The abysmal conditions and appalling outcomes in plaintiffs' schools are unprecedented, the complainant said, and they would be unthinkable in schools serving predominantly white, affluent student populations. The lawsuit, which a lawyer for the plaintiffs said was the first of its kind at the federal level, named Michigan officials, including Governor Rick Schneider, as defendants because the state had played an outsized role in managing Detroit's schools, while the school district and the city struggled with a lack of resources. In his decision on Friday dismissing the suit, Judge Stephen J. Murphy III said that access to literacy, which he also referred as a minimally adequate education, was not a fundamental right, and he said the lawsuit had failed to show that the state had practiced overt racial discrimination. But he conceded that the conditions at some Detroit schools were nothing short of devastating. Mark Rosenbaum, the lawyer with Public Counsel, a public interest law firm in California that led the legal team that represented the students, said he planned to appeal the decision. In 2018, you shouldn't have to file lawsuits so that kids get access to teachers and books, he said, calling the condition of the city's schools a civil rights issue. Historically, access to literacy has been a tool to subordinate certain groups and certain communities and to keep those communities down, he said. And I think the most telling fact in Michigan today is that blameless kids in Detroit are going to schools where they don't find teachers or books, and this is just the latest version of that historic attempt to subordinate certain communities. The Michigan Attorney's General Office, whose lawyers represented the states and argued successfully to have the lawsuit dismissed, referred questions about the case to Mr. Snyder's office, which did not respond to requests for comment on Tuesday. A report from the congressionally mandated National Assessment of Educational Progress found that last year, students in Detroit's public school district scored lower in reading and math than students in all of the other 26 large urban districts measured. When the lawsuit was filed, the Detroit School District was emerging from insolvency after Mr. Snyder signed off on a $617 million bailout and restructuring plan. It had spent years under a revolving door series of state-appointed emergency managers beginning in 2009, but the schools were still falling apart, and critics of the state government compared it to the situation in Flint, Michigan, where state-appointed emergency managers presided over a crisis that left residents with dangerous levels of lead in their tap water starting in 2014. In his decision, Judge Murphy agreed that state officials bore some responsibility for the quality of education in the district. He also agreed that giving students the opportunity to learn to read was of incalculable importance, adding that some level of literacy was necessary for voting, applying for a job, and securing a place to live. But those points do not necessarily make access to literacy a fundamental right, he said. Paul Trachtenberg, an expert in education and constitutional law and a professor emeritus at Rutgers Law School, said lawsuits like this one are typically filed and have a better chance of success in state-level courts. In theory, it would be a great breakthrough to have the federal courts recognize education as a fundamental right, he said, but I see no chance of that happening in my lifetime.
Awesome, thank you so much. What's your name?
Jacob.
Jacob, thank you for reading that. So if you can again turn to someone, maybe the person behind you, and think about one statement or two statements that stuck out from this article to you, and talk about why. Okay, so would anybody like to share a piece of your conversation? What stood out to you? Shout it out. Yes?
Where it says it's the first lawsuit of its kind to be filed at a federal level.
At the federal level, that surprised you?
Yeah, I would imagine there'd be more.
Yeah, because the schools are so
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
We're talking about the sentence where he talks about how this is like a tool to subordinate certain groups and keep certain communities down. That's not like accidental.
It's not accidental. Yeah. Anybody here, please?
How the judge had added that some level of literacy is necessary for voting, applying for a job, and
live, which everyone would agree that everyone should have, and yet he said that the thing that's necessary to be able to do that is not a right.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a perfect segue into what I'd like to do next. So, so Bob Moses, when he was working in Mississippi with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to organize sharecroppers to vote, and are you familiar with Freedom Summer, when students from around the country came to help register folks to vote? And what he said, and what his argument was, which is the same one it seems you're making the argument today, which is that you can't deny people literacy and then force them to be literate in order to vote. So I'm going to hand these out. If you could just take one, they're different versions. But this is the Mississippi, this is actually Louisiana's literacy test, which was used to, so you could take one copy. They're going around. And I'll just read this quote here. It says, Bob Moses said in the 60s, everyone said sharecroppers were apathetic until we got them demanding to vote. That finally got attention. Here, where kids are falling wholesale through the cracks or chasms, dropping out of sight, becoming fodder for jails, people say they do not want to learn. The only ones who can dispel that notion are the kids themselves. They, like Ms. Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ms. Devine E., Ms. Devine Steptoe, and others who changed the political face of Mississippi in the 1960s, have to demand what everyone says they don't want. And I think that's a particularly powerful theme that resonates with what I have witnessed in schools and in young people today, and how our schools marginalize and undereducate folks, and then we don't think that they actually are making the demand to have a quality education. And you can see that in these kids' stories. So in the article, the attorney says, historically, access to literacy has been a tool to subordinate certain groups and certain communities and to keep those communities down. So now take a look at the literacy test. So it was 30 questions that you had to answer in 10 minutes or less. Anybody else need one? What are your thoughts?
It's really hard.
It's really hard. It's absurd almost. Right, thank you. Yeah. So until 1964, this was a legal way, and it was across the multiple states. I happened to get the one from Louisiana, but used to discourage voting. And I think that's where this history and connection to today comes in. So these are some, I wanted to hear, you'd be able to hear from some of the students. Well, let's go ahead and read this. So this is another one of the plaintiffs. If somebody could read the quote that's bold, that's highlighted.
What's happening in the Detroit schools fell so far below any unacceptable level of education that it does violate the federal constitution. If someone is functionally illiterate, unable to read at grade level, then how can we expect them to meaningfully engage in the rest of their explicit constitutional rights? How can we expect them to meaningfully participate in our government and exercise the right to vote and the right to free speech if their ability to obtain information and evaluate that information is so limited because the public schools that they attended did not even give them an opportunity to become literate?
So any thoughts, reactions to that? You're nodding.
This is basically what someone mentioned before, like the things that we need to basically like survive in our society, it's not a right. That's basically what it's saying. We can't participate in the community because of it, but at the same time, we don't really have not everyone has the same opportunity, to it.
I mean, there's like a number of tools that the government uses in terms of voter suppression. Like right now, we're seeing like Native American communities being denied the right to vote because
Yeah.
they don't have a legitimate address, despite the fact that
Right.
they own the land.
North
So
Dakota, yeah.
Oftentimes it's like a politically motivated thing where they want to suppress certain communities because certain communities are going to be more likely to vote for their political opponents. So it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy and something that continually feeds itself.
Yeah, yeah. And are you all familiar with that? That's just what happened last week. So, and a lot of Native Americans in that area use P.O. boxes. And so part of the new legislation is that if you don't have a physical street address, you can't show up, you can't vote. You had a question or point? Yeah.
I do like, from reading this, it's obviously a right that people should be literate. But I also think that in order for society to thrive, we should also encourage education. And education just shouldn't be something that is limited to certain people, because that's just how a society thrives.
Right. So, so one has to ask themselves if it's intentional, right? To educate some and not others, just like the use of the test, right, in the past. So here we can hear from one of the students. So maybe somebody could read that too. My cold here. This is one of the kids who is a plaintiff and graduated. Yeah.
Is this really a school? Like, this has to be a movie. Paul said he thought people were getting set up to fail. The 2017 graduate of Osborne High School in Detroit says he had a B+ average, but his SAT score was a 930, not high enough to get into college. Desperate for change, students from 5 of Detroit's worst performing public schools, including Osborne, sued the state of Michigan in 2016, saying they had a constitutional right to be educated. Literacy, the argument goes, is necessary for voting, accessing the courts, and serving in the military. Only 10% of students are reading at grade level. The school district needs $500 million to update its crumbling schools, and the district's financial structure post-bailout only allocated $25 million to spend on such endeavors.
Right. So to your point, right? Thoughts or reactions to that? Yes.
This is interesting because now this is intersecting two educational problems where clearly we're seeing some of the problems with the teaching resources itself, but now it's comparing that, like, even though the student had a high grade, it's a low test score, but that could also be a problem with the test and what the test measures and probably is. So if the argument is, well, I had such good grades, how come, in this school this grade does not equate to this test score? Maybe the test isn't valid either. So there's some Venn diagram of those two problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is a really good argument to people who would say that it's like, up to the individual, yada, yada, because even an individual who is, doing everything that they're supposed to at this school, B+ is like a good average, they still obviously aren't performing enough. So it's like, it's a structural issue, like with the schools itself. It's not just like the individual student who can't learn.
Yeah. I would say, I think this connects to what I'll hopefully get to conclude with, which is about the Algebra Project and the Alliance, because a lot of students, so a large number of students, even in Miami-Dade County, graduate but are not college ready. So they're not getting into universities like FIU because they're maybe skewed with the test, but there's also, are they receiving the accelerated education that they deserve? So I think we have to decide as a country, in the we the people are young people. And if they are a part of the conversation, if they are a part of the we the people, then they should have the rights to an education. That would be the argument. I think the students are appealing, and as of now, most of the time, some states have words like quality education, but it's not federally mandated. Yes?
So that lawsuit was filed in September 2016. Is that the lawsuit that's referred to in this article?
No, this was
that's at the state level.
Yeah.
And so did that one succeed?
The one in the state level?
Yeah.
I think they're all being appealed.
Okay,
No.
so that one failed as well. 'Cause it says in the article that
This one is from July?
Okay, but can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
Because it says, so that one's in July 2016. It just says 2016, so this one's in September 2016. So
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So Osborne, this student who's speaking here was one of the plaintiffs in the case from this past July.
Okay.
He graduated last year, but they're referring to other state cases.
Okay, so other state cases have been successful, but in Michigan it hasn't been successful.
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
They tried to sue at the state and federal level.
So what they're arguing here, and what the question to you is or to everyone, is that should it be a federal mandate, a federal part of a constitutional right to a quality education? Just like should your right to vote be federally protected? So right now, states can choose, yeah.
Could they not have argued that education is a human right, and have they not violating their human rights by not giving them access to proper education?
Yeah, and I think those were the words and the language that they put in there, yeah. But they said no. Even the judge in the earlier slide, or in the article you see, he says the conditions are deplorable, but the Constitution doesn't protect that.
Shouldn't they be arguing then the way that they fund schools is basically systematically racist because we fund it through real estate tax? Or is that only Florida? I'm not sure. Because they fund the schools by how much people around that school pay.
Right, your property taxes.
Property taxes.
Yeah. So that was kind of the debate I was hoping to have. Like, what do you think? You know? Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I don't think everyone agrees with necessarily my position, right? So what do you think? I can jump ahead to that. Let me do this first. I think I want to read you something because we're talking about, I don't want it to be an abstraction. So I'd like to talk about a moment for me that 2 years ago, something I wrote about the schools in Miami. So, and then we'll pick up the debate, okay? Because I want to, because I see a correlation between this and what's called the school to prison or the cradle to prison pipeline, right? Because if you're not getting more than an 8th grade education, then you are more likely to be homeless, to be dead, or to be incarcerated, right? And so I think that one may ask, when we go back to the beginning of our conversation about is it intentional or not, are we intentionally not educating some kids? That's on us to discuss, you know? And so 2 years ago, the students I was working with were in 10th grade. They've since graduated. And there was a series of shootings in the neighborhood. And both the school district and the police were coming out about saying something, right? And a lot of the district officials were constantly coming to the schools and saying, say something, or in the neighborhoods. So after that, I wrote this down. I said, the police in the district keep saying, if you see something, say something. Well, I'm seeing something, and I'm saying. I'm saying they can do more to provide students access to quality education that the young people are demanding. I see, feel, hear puddles in stairways, freezing cold classrooms, computers that don't work, teachers that don't show up. What was it, 15 absent on Wednesday? I see students asking to learn more and being told it's not on the test. I see students being told if they don't sit down while they work, then it will be 10 points off their grade. I see a comprehensive urban farm and aquaponics lab on site at a school, one that is completely underutilized because it doesn't fit into the science pacing guide. I see my students told not to eat the chips I gave them in the auditorium because we have a rat problem, while I see security guards selling donuts to children. I see a rodent problem as one more thing being blamed on the students. I see good teachers being discouraged. And worse, I see students yelled at, kicked out, and withdrawn. I see a very broken system. I see a system that seems to intentionally take away hope from students. And I painfully see young people dying and going to prison because of this. But I also see, in spite of this, students showing up on Saturday to do math and real work. I see students willing and wanting to stay after school, but need a safe way home. I see students come during their lunch to do work and to talk about what is happening in their lives. I see students that know the system is broken, and they are pushing to succeed in spite of that. So yes, I see something, and I'm going to say something. So from there, I wanted to ask if some of you would volunteer to come down, and we could do kind of a fishbowl circle and debate whether or not you think those kids that I see and the kids in Detroit deserve the right to a quality education. If I get a couple volunteers and pull a couple of these chairs around. Okay, well, it kind of aren't really a bowl, but typically they would be sitting, facing each other. And the idea is that they're going to engage in a discussion, and those of us on the outside are going to observe two things, kind of the form, how does the conversation go, and what they say. And then you'll get an opportunity to jump in and respond to them afterwards, but first you have to be quiet. So in your class, often it's kind of hard because you want to jump in because you have a view, right? In this setting, it might not be as difficult. So I'll throw it out there. What do you think? Should students have should there be a constitutional amendment that guarantees students a quality education? Why or why not? And how would we get there? And any other sort of topic that we have just been discussing. Do you or do you not see a connection between the criminal justice system and equity in education? Off you go. Now you all decide how you're going to monitor one another.
Should we just pick our own side? Do you want to like split it?
No, you have to pick your own side.
All right.
I mean, who's going to argue that?
Who's you're gonna say?
No, I think kids don't deserve to learn.
They should have learned today.
Well, I mean, I think they at least deserve 8th grade teaching. Education up to the 8th grade. You could push to say that they at least deserve high school education, but at that point they're already becoming an adult, and most of the time, if you're going to drop out, you're going to drop out in your years of high school rather than anywhere else, because then you have chances of working and chances of making money independent from education. But at the very least, 8th grade level, I believe, should be required by state, which I believe it is required by the state currently.
What you're saying, that just education is like guaranteed up to 8th grade?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't think that's enough though. I think that the argument would be that we need like an equitable education for everybody, and I would say definitely through high school, because like you can barely survive with like a high school graduation level these days, let alone like a middle school graduation level. So I would definitely argue that it shouldn't just be that schools and children need to be in schools. It needs to be that schools can provide an equitable education to everybody, like through high school.
They need the money to afford that too. So you need to recognize that if they can't afford that point, because a lot of people still pay to go to school. There's private institutions and stuff like that, and they have to go out of their way and out of their pockets to pay. Or on top of that, you also have to think about the people that are in bad school districts that they're actually dangerous to go to. There's plenty of schools like that, and they don't want to go there.
Like what I had mentioned about the property tax, I think there has to be a federal amendment that makes it that it's equally distributed throughout all districts. So people who are paying really high property taxes, those schools in those neighborhoods are really great, and we can see that here in Miami. Those schools that are in Coral Gables, in Palmetto Bay, they have really great programs in arts and culture and math, science. They have everything because they pay a lot of money. So that needs to be distributed equally so that everybody has just one base and just has the same base.
The problem with that to a lot of Americans is that distributed equally to a lot of people means communism.
Right.
And so lots of people are going to argue that they don't want their property taxes on their fancy expensive homes going to some inner city school that has nothing to do with them, that's miles away or whatever. They want their kids and their school to benefit from their high property taxes, and so it's going to be very different to.
And where do you separate, at the state line or as a country?
No, I think it'd be a federal amendment, but then the average would have to be depending on the county.
So the entire country pays, and then that then goes to each
Well,
individual
no, and I meant
school
to say
average?
in each county or in each state, so this amount has to be spread around. And then if they want to change the narrative to say it's not communism, then yeah, I guess some schools will get a little bit more because of their property taxes, but everybody needs a certain base point And about the communism thing, also they need to change the narrative. It's not communism, it's patriotism. We're taking care of our neighbors. We pay taxes so that we can provide and help everybody, our neighbors.
What about undocumented people?
That's a whole nother debate.
Yeah.
I just think that, like, in this political climate, 2018, I mean, you had Bernie Sanders run on a platform of free education and higher education and all that stuff, and everybody's calling him socialist. So I don't think with Republicans in control of all three branches of government that anything is going to be done anytime soon to help the people in these schools that are not getting the best education they can, because typically the people in these schools are from minorities, such as African Americans, Hispanics, and other.
I mean, I think it's not gonna happen because like they specifically don't want it to happen, because I think that there is a relation between like the lack in funding and incarceration rates, and like people know that we need people in jails to like produce our products that get made in jail, to, you know, for like all the various reasons, right? And so I think that's why they're gonna continue to not fund schools correctly.
Right, like the private prison system is really.
Exactly, yeah, and I think like there completely is definitely a relation between like lack of education and becoming incarcerated at a younger age and things like that, so.
Yeah, the way that I see it is that it's basically just really, really racist, and they want to keep it this way so that they keep those communities down, like it said in the article. And they're just, like in my opinion, I don't think that there was reparations made after slavery was abolished, and the communities were not given a good foundation in order to be able to establish themselves as a, you know, a more or just an effective or productive member of society.
And well, I think the problem with establishing the right to an education on a federal level is that it's not in the Constitution, as far as I know. It might be, but I don't think it's in the Constitution. And so if it's really hard to add stuff to the Constitution after the fact. So if it's not in the Constitution originally, it becomes difficult to then get everybody to agree to add a right to education for everybody.
Well, Thomas Jefferson actually came out saying, it's a pretty famous quote, that every 19 years, he believed that every 19 years the Constitution should be rewritten by the younger generation so that no previous generation would have a hold over the next generation. And I'm pretty sure at this point in time everybody can kind of universally agree that everybody should at least, you have the right to it. You don't have to do it, because you know there's obviously going to be the people that don't want it. It's just they want to do some trade, or you know, I'm not going to say like to a person that wants to weld, like, hey, you have to learn algebra and geometry, and you don't really need that in comparison. But if you look at current society, education is incredibly important. At this point, back then, getting a high school diploma, you could provide for your family. You could, you know, the whole American dream, white picket fence and everything. Now, you pretty much need at least a bachelor's, and even then you're kind of struggling. You need to go for your master's, and if not your doctorate, to actually try to do something with your life that's saying, oh, this is a career path that I can now take and grow from here, you know? So.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Thomas Jefferson said that, and I definitely agree with that. I think the problem that we have now is that we have the generation that's the baby boomer generation that's completely controlling everything in the government. And they're good, they're safe, they have their money, they're profiting off the private prison system, they're profiting off just all of the things that we suffer for, that communities suffer for, they're profiting off of that. So why change for them? So for everything to change, basically we have to like get into office.
So super controversial idea. This is like my grandmother would kill me for saying this. So what's more important in your mind? You know, let's look at it super objectively. Like, what's more important, the potential that a young person has, or the security of an elder person, of an elderly person? You know,
Wait, how are they related to like this issue?
Well, that's what I'm going to get to. The social security system that we go to for our elderly, what if a portion of it, I'm not saying all of it or anything, but what if a small portion of it was converted to the education of younger people, and then on top of that you go there, and those younger people then help. I know this is super controversial, but like what if, like,
Well,
I know it never passed, but wouldn't it work if all that money went to the kids? They were able to get better educations, better jobs, they were able to make more money. They would be able to take care of their people, and there would be a surplus at the point.
that
Yeah, but-
students getting better educations and whatnot puts more money into the economy, because for every however many dollars put into like a kid's education, you get like an X number back into when the kid then becomes a productive member of society and
But,
stuff.
like,
But it's-
I'm sorry, besides that though, like, why does it have to come from Social Security? Like, we
Right.
spend
Well,
so
it's
much,
a
no, like,
federally
literally.
mandated, it was one of the largest federally mandated, tax collection
Yeah.
agencies in the world, or in the United States, sorry. In the United States, I'm tired. I've been up since like 2 o'clock in the morning. But in the United States, so, and at
Wait,
that
but why
point,
can't, I'm sorry.
go ahead, no, go ahead.
But you're saying, so in order to fund education, we have to take money from Social Security?
Not
How about
necessarily
defense?
specifically from that.
We spend more in defense than the
Yeah.
next
Well,
10 countries.
We're also a
United.
superpower, you have to realize that.
Well, we
have.
don't
But we're
need
an
to be.
isolated country. Canada and Mexico are
No,
neighbors.
Well, with the world how it is now, like you can shoot a nuke from one side of the world to the other side of the nuke. That doesn't
We
matter.
are the most
guys.
we are one of the most predatorial, like, predator
Hold on, we're
countries
getting-
in the
we're-
world.
we're so going off base.
Talking about military
Like, we
spending
are the issue, we don't need defense, we are the
Education.
ones, like,
Literally.
destroying other countries.
I don't
Okay,
even
okay,
think it
okay.
should resort to that, like taking money from a federal mandated like tax bin, whatever it's called. Because I feel like at a state level, some states have the money. Like for example,
The money's there.
the state of Maryland, Maryland. I was getting my states confused. State of Maryland finished this past year with 504 in surplus, million in surplus, right? The first day of school, over 60 schools were closed because of the conditions. The kids had to be sent home early, or the schools weren't open at all because the AC wasn't working. There was problem with the pipes. 504 million in surplus, and you mean to tell me some sort of money couldn't be allocated to fix those issues? The state has the money, so I don't think we have to resort to desperate measures as
Well, I'm not
in
saying
going through
specifically
that.
just
Yeah,
that.
but I
That
feel
was just
like
one example I was
we
talking
don't-
about. But
we don't-
we should take it from some place, and at the very least, to where it goes into the direction, the same direction. You get
Well, we
what I
already
mean?
do take.
I don't even think we need to take it,
Yeah.
they're unwilling to
It's not enough.
distribute it. Like, it's, they have the resources, they're unwilling to give it to these impoverished, kids in these neighborhoods. Like, they don't want to.
Yeah.
They don't want them to succeed, honestly. They want them to go to the school to prison pipeline so they can, make more money off them being in jail. That's my
Exactly. Like,
So
I
let's
think they're
pause
just-
there. Thank you very much, and let's hear from the outside folks. Observations, comments. So at first, you're just gonna share your thoughts. They're not gonna respond yet. And then after folks have gotten a chance to share, then we can have a dialogue or ask questions. So I saw your hand first.
Yeah, okay, so a lot of you guys, I've noticed that it was more about perspectives. So we have to define what we value in society and in culture, because I have personally experienced this systematic oppression, because I grew up not in Miami, but on the other coast, so it will be more like smaller minorities and everything like that. So there is a connection. Like, I've seen it and I've personally experienced it. What he's saying is not wrong, and it's a good idea, but it descends behind that we find it more stable that older people who are more accredited to have more trust, because with potential, it could always die. Like, people in the graves die with potential. So I understand what they're coming from. About the federal system, the Constitution does need to change from every 19 years, but I personally think as fast as society is moving to use the internet and how connected we are, it should be a lot shorter, because even though our generation gap is larger, everything changes a lot faster. And then perspective, and then with money, I'm trying to remember, I had a lot of things and I didn't write it down.
Well, we can come back to you. We get a couple more comments, and
Yeah.
just you think.
I found it interesting from the first moment that you all were initially uncomfortable with the idea of there not being an opposing side, or that you felt you assumed that the instructions included that someone should oppose it, because I'm pretty sure that wasn't part of the instructions. And I just think that speaks to like this political culture of like a political debate is always two different sides, as opposed to a nuanced conversation within even a side you all agree on, which ended up happening, a very nuanced conversation on something you all agree on, so that was cool. And there's a lot of they, whether it was, those students in those schools, but also, those people who don't want it to change, which is not like bad in terms of those people are being othered because if they're doing something bad, but like I can see a great awareness of the specific people in specific positions who want to keep the stuff the way it is. Politicians was mentioned once, but even politicians is a big group of people, but who are these they that we need to counter?
Other observations from the outside the tank? Nothing else stood out? What about the process of just watching a conversation? Any comments on that?
That was stressful. I was stressing. Like, some of you guys would cut off each other. It's like, no, let them finish. They were going somewhere. God damn it! So, I was really, I've been in a fishbowl before. I've taken like contemporary international problems, like those type of things. And I've learned that even though you have the urge to just interject, you have to wait till they finish, and then you could go, because you're still gonna have that thought.
Yeah, I hear you. I've been teaching it that way a long time, and sometimes I'm still like, want to jump in.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the conversation, and I think that part of the process is to slow us down and really think about these issues and think them through. And I think your conversation shows the complexity. I want to read, or have somebody read, this last quote from Bob Moses that I think connects with what you all were grappling with. Can somebody read? This is from an interview he did with NPR a couple years ago.
This relates to a larger problem, which is the question of, well, who is the constitution of people in the country? Over the course of 2.25 centuries, by hook or crook, we have managed, in spite of ourselves, to extend the reach of that concept to larger and larger classes of adults. What we haven't figured out is how to extend that to young people, to the youth of our country. These kids spend most of their time in school, so this is how they relate to the country. So the country needs to figure out how it relates to them. It's a huge problem. I really do see education as a civil rights issue of our time. The sharecroppers we worked with were the serfs of the industrial age. So if we are turning kids out of high schools that have the equivalent of an 8th grade education, then in effect we are setting them up for serfdom of the information age. Those people in the plantations, they were hidden, out of sight, and they suffered quality. These kids will not suffer quietly.
Thank you. What do you think? And then all of you, Leah.
I really like the comparison that he did between the students essentially being like the current age, would you say serfdom?
Mm-hmm.
The serfdom? Because yeah, that's totally true. Like we were saying in the fishbowl, like we've talked about in this whole thing, like you cannot really go anywhere with less than like a bachelor's degree. Sometimes not even a bachelor's degree is enough for a lot of fields now. So you really are setting them up to just be in the same situation where it's like indentured servants, slavery really, so.
Yeah, awesome. So in the 10 minutes I think I have left, I wanted to end with something a little bit about what's the solution here. So if I can get that video, maybe you can help me. So across the country, folks that have been involved in the Algebra Project and civil rights organizations, teachers, professors, students have created this We the People We the People for Math Literacy. And because math is such a gateway, I'm not a math person, that this organization of people across the country are looking at kids that are performing in the bottom quartile in math. And those kids are the most likely to drop out of school. So the question becomes, how do we organize to see those kids get the education that they deserve? And so there are different groups. And one of the groups is, so we have these schools in Miami-Dade and in Broward County. And if you're interested in getting involved in the work, you can contact me. But I wanted to end with this clip because it shows the young people that Bob Moses is talking about making and the demand for this quality education. Thank you. You guys can stay there and see it, right?
I'm too bright to be in the hood trapping. Like, nobody won't never get to know my potential.
At the core of the work, there are people, and those people have voice.
Before I die, I want to leave a mark on the world. Like, he was an inspirational person. He persevered, do this and that.
And you think about how their voice then becomes a real chorus of work called ground games.
What is it exactly that we're trying to change? You know, is it just how we learn math, or is it education in general? Because I believe that our education system from the beginning, it hasn't really changed too much.
We've had voice groups working from a perspective of who you are in the work and what you do in the work, how you think about the work.
I feel like we should study what actually helps the students learn best, not just in this model that you go to these classes and you sit down and the teacher tells you stuff and you remember it. I think we have to challenge that model of how are we actually doing education and what is the actual goal of education.
How do you see this particular moment using math literacy as a platform, as a way in which citizens in the community engage the systems and structures which dictate their lives? How do you see those things?
We see that things are bad, and they can get even worse if we don't stand up.
Ordinary citizens, in this case young people, have a right and a responsibility to actively work on solving the problems that are most deeply affecting them. And even beyond that, their participation in that way is necessary if we're going to fundamentally change or shift the problem.
The students are given an opportunity to speak up on what they're facing, what are their trials, and I think alliancing and coming together is really going to help us solve some of the problems that we're facing.
I had teachers that say that, like, I'm getting paid, I ain't really got to teach y'all. I could just sit here, put some on the board, and they come in, I could get up and put on the act like I've been teaching. So it's like, it started with the teacher. Once the teacher set that foundation that she care, it's like the students gonna follow.
So that relationship between the student and the teacher is really the main thing, because people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Once I know that you care about me and I trust you, then my ears open up to what you're saying.
I think that it's very important that we really think about that critical question of what bottom-up means and what it means to have young people not only at the center but at the forefront of the work that we do.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It's a simple, declarative sentence, and we have to decide if we are going to be a we the people in this country.
Or take any questions or comments or reactions.
Let's do about 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Please, yes.
A lot of the problems is because we're stuck in the past. So schooling originally, the reason why kids started doing they started making schools for kids to have like a type of daycare, and there was a high necessity for specialized workers and a higher education. So it started as that because younger kids were being employed by large companies because their fingers were smaller, they could work faster, and they get away with a lower pay. So it started as that, and we didn't progress more than just a simple specialization of middle school. And since society needs a higher education, I personally think to the point of college should be given free. Because we're needing such more, we need such more education and a lot of necessity from society because we're just so progressed.
There's a really interesting study from Southern Poverty Institute that resonates with what you're saying. So they looked at income, and so it was from, I probably said this in class. So in 1970, the amount of people in the bottom quartile of income, 7% graduated with a bachelor's degree. In the top income quartile, it was about 40%. So in 2012, 40-some years later, the top income quartile went from 40% to almost 79.5, 80% graduated from college. Guess how many in the bottom income quartile? It went from 7% to 9%. So whatever we're doing is not working, right? And the times have changed, as you say. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Hi, so I write for Panther now, as a contributor writer for now. Just a question about, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Amendment 7, which is basically in Florida, during the elections, one of the amendments is 7. And part of that is to make a board of trustees responsible for the university, and it is appointed through the government. I don't know how you guys would feel about that, because I think that relates to how.
Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on the amendment, because it's kind of, they might need more clarification.
So there's 3 parts to it. One is for those that are first responders, like children of first responders and military veterans that died during they are to get benefits and free access to college education. But to do that, the universities would have to raise their funds. Would have to raise tuition. Excuse me. Would have to raise their tuition. But another portion of it is just to be relevant to this discussion. Another portion of it has to deal with how so essentially kind of work together.
I know what you're referring to. You got folks could look it up.
The university's board of trustees, which already exists, would have to have a supermajority instead of a majority to raise fees at the university. So just more people on the board that already exists would have to approve fees going up. And so it's just harder to raise fees, like establishing a new but from my understanding, either starting at 6 or 7 and all the rest of the amendments all have how you described as totally separate issues. So like before I go, I'll do slightly more, but I think from 6 on I'm basically writing off because all of them have these 2 or 3 totally unrelated issues that it's impossible to really.
Yeah, and they're bundled. So the Miami Herald just released, it's an excellent guide that unpacks them. And so what's happened is they're bundled together, which is why it's hard to summarize it. So something you might agree with goes along with something you didn't. That's not the case in Amendment 4. Everyone know what Amendment 4 is about? Yeah, restore formerly incarcerated folks the right to vote. It would impact 1.5 million people. Yeah. Well, can I please first give our round of applause to our fabulous fiscal? And thank you all for coming. If you want to get involved in the work, send me an email.
Produced by Academic Video Services within the Division of Information Technology at Florida International University.